Hello, welcome back to BBC News. This is the scene live at Westminster. In the next 15 minutes, nominations close in the contest to become the next leader of the Conservative Party and the UK's next Prime Minister, the third in 7 weeks. Well, Rishi Sunak is the firm favourite. He currently has a commanding lead of Tory MPs. At the last count, 193 of them had publicly endorsed him. Now, that is more than half the Parliamentary Conservative Party and well over the minimum required, which is 100. But the real question is whether the only other contender, that is Penny Mordaunt, can also get 100 Tory MPs to back her. Now, she currently has 26 publicly declared supporters. That is far short of the 100 she needs. If she does make the magic number of 100, there will then be a vote of Conservative MPs this afternoon indicating who they support. And then the wider Conservative Party membership will vote this week. Well, we haven't got very long to wait for the official numbers because Sir Graham Brady, who is chairman of the 1922 group of Tory backbenchers, is going to make the announcement on the number of nominations shortly after 2 o'clock, which is when the nominations close. Let's go to our political editor, Chris Mason, who's got the very latest. Chris, what are you hearing on numbers at the moment?
Last minute scramble for votes, Ben. In the next 10 or 15 minutes, the window will slam closed. The Penny Mordaunt's campaign have been doing their utmost all morning to try and get their numbers up and up and up and as close to, and from their perspective, ideally over that threshold of 100. Now, their publicly declared supporters is much, much, much lower than that. But they've been telling me in the last hour that they are within a whisker of doing it, of making it to that magic number. Now, we have no way of independently verifying that, but crucially, those MPs who might be willing to back her do not have to say so publicly, and some might want to hedge their bets in terms of what they say publicly, conscious that the wind does look like it's blowing in a different direction, and it could well be Rishi Sunak either sooner or later. In other words, Prime Minister by the end of the week, if he isn't confirmed as heading in that direction in the next half hour. So a huge amount of persuading has been going on. One little twist in the last half an hour or so, George Freeman, Conservative MP who'd been a backer of Penny Mordaunt, telling the BBC this lunchtime that it's in his judgment it was worthwhile that she should fold, that she should pack in her campaign in the interests of Conservative unity and in the interests of stability for the country, that protracting this ongoing battle within the Conservative Party was not, in his view, in the national interest. And this from one of her leading supporters. Team Mordaunt still convinced that they are getting close. We may never know how close they've got if they fall short. If they make it, of course, we'll know that some of this briefing we've had over the last couple of hours had some significance to it. And I've been told by figures at the very top of Penny Mordaunt's campaign that they were absolutely convinced they were very, very close. So keen were they to make the case in the last hour that they only needed to persuade a handful more in order to ensure that there was a contest and there was a vote this afternoon. So we await that outcome from Sir Graham Brady in the next half an hour or so to determine whether or not we know who our next Prime Minister will be, assuming office as soon as tomorrow, or that there is to be a vote this afternoon after a hustings in front of Conservative MPs, a vote is around tea time this afternoon, to work out where the balance of opinion lies within the Conservative Party, if there are two candidates who meet the threshold, before, assuming neither of them was to withdraw at that point, the two names go forward to the party membership for an online poll to take place in the next couple of days before a result on Friday.
Chris, let's just speculate. I mean, if that does happen, that vote of wider Tory party members, how much does that change things? At the moment, Rishi Sunak very much has the commanding lead. He is the firm favourite, but how much does it change it for Penny Mordaunt if it goes to the wider membership?
It changes it completely because it opens the whole thing up again. It puts a giant question mark over both of their names rather than what has become something of an assumption since last night when Boris Johnson withdrew, that it was highly likely to be Rishi Sunak. Suddenly it wouldn't be that clear. Why? Well, the electorate expands massively. Still, of course, a tiny, tiny proportion of the population at large, but around about 160,000 people being canvassed rather rapidly online in the next next couple of days. We would hear about the prospectuses for government from the two candidates. Perhaps they would pop up on television and make their cases publicly. I'm sure they would if they were courting the views of Conservative members, as well as making a pitch beyond them to the country at large. And Penny Mordaunt's team say that they would have reason to be confident that they might be able to win. Now, one other factor to bear in mind, and this was baked into the contest's rules at the tail end of last week, is that even though there are only going to be two candidates maximum, we will assume, come 2:15 this afternoon, there will still be that vote of Conservative MPs, because there was a view taken within the party that it was important there was an indicative vote to indicate to the membership where the balance of power at Westminster lay in terms of where support lay. Why? Because whilst the current rules say that a leadership race is ultimately decided by the members, the practicality of governing and holding a party together means you have to be able to command a majority amongst your own MPs. And to illustrate that, we can point to the case studies of the current Prime Minister and the former one, both of whom lost the confidence of their party, and in the end that meant they were on their way out of Downing Street. So the rules are trying to account for that by ensuring the membership, if they do get a say, do so in full knowledge of where the balance of opinion lies in Parliament. Does that mean the members would follow if you like, the guidance of their MPs at Westminster? Not necessarily. So there'd be a huge amount of jeopardy, and the campaigning and the arguments and the prospectuses for government would be flushed out in the next couple of days, and we would have to wait until the end of the week to determine who our Prime Minister would be. Normally the end of the week for a new Prime Minister would seem like quite a short time frame, but at the speed with which politics is moving at the moment, that would suddenly seem like the distant horizon, compared with the prospect in as little as 20 minutes or so, finding out who might be our Prime Minister as soon as tomorrow.
But whoever it is, whenever it is, Chris, they face really daunting challenges.
They really, really do. And we should remember that, because for all of the circus, if you like, around Westminster over the last 7 weeks, and remember, we're going to end up with a third Prime Minister in 7 weeks by the end of this week, however the next half hour pans out, they will inherit a in-tray that is as daunting as the one that finished off Boris Johnson in its own way and absolutely finished off Liz Truss. So they'll face a party that is not united. Just take the 60-odd public declarations for Boris Johnson, for instance, roughly equivalent to the majority that the Conservatives have. Now, I'm not saying that instantly all of those who initially backed Boris Johnson would be disloyal within nanoseconds. They wouldn't. But nonetheless, it's an indication that they would have rather had the guy that they kicked out 7 weeks ago rather than Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt. Then you've got spiralling prices, then you've got grim-looking public finances, you've got that economic statement penciled in for a week today with the expectation of significant spending cuts being announced in multiple Whitehall departments, and then you've got a party that's been in government for 12 years and is showing its age in terms of its time in government. So a massive, massive challenge for a new Prime Minister. And of course, now we know it isn't going to be Boris Johnson, who won that majority as the party leader for the Conservatives at the last general election. The questions around legitimacy and mandate for the new Prime Minister will be instant, and we're already seeing that clamour from the opposition parties demanding that there should be a general election. Now, a general election lies in the gift of a Prime Minister or in the gift of a majority of people in the House of Commons, in other words, a significant proportion of the governing party. Now, at the moment, the Conservatives will stare at the opinion polls and think a general election is the last thing they could possibly want, or there are one or two publicly now saying, Christopher Chope being one of them, that maybe, just maybe, given that legitimacy question, easy for me to say, that's what should happen.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. We'll be back with you shortly when we have the numbers. Let's go, though, in the meantime, to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, who's in Downing Street. So, Vicky, what was a 3-horse race last night became a 2-horse race when Boris Johnson dropped out of the race. But Penny Mordaunt, as Chris was just saying, has it all to do. What are you hearing about the numbers?
Well, on my way here, I walked through Parliament, bumped into several Conservative MPs, some in the Cabinet, some ministers, some former ministers, most of them supporting Rishi Sunak, and that is borne out, of course, by those numbers. And the overwhelming feeling, I suppose not surprisingly from them, is that they want Penny Mordaunt to stand down, even if she gets the numbers. I think we've just demonstrated, haven't we, over the last, not just today, but over the weekend, the Conservative Party is effectively still talking to itself. They did that all summer, and there will be plenty of voters, and this is what really alarms lots of Tory MPs. So we're looking at all of this and just thinking we have so many problems that need to be dealt with, and they can't even decide on who their leader will be. And the idea that it's protracted even longer to Friday, I think just makes them very, very fearful that the public, if it hasn't already lost patience, many of them, that they will get increasingly frustrated by this. We've had no talk really of policy, have we? I mean, Rishi Sunak, I don't think, has spoken since he lost to Liz Truss, apart from, I think, a couple of debates in the House of Commons on local constituency issues. We haven't heard from him. She did an interview yesterday, Penny Mordaunt, asked about policy, really unable or unwilling to answer anything about what she would do. And this is in the middle of what has become an economic crisis. So I think a lot of frustration from Conservative MPs. They just want to get on with it. They, of course, want to talk about unity because they want their party to stay together. And they think the idea that even if Penny Mordaunt were to get just over 100 backers, that it then goes to the party membership and they may go then against what the parliamentary party would do. Well, they think that just adds to the disunity, to the infighting, which everyone predicts is going to be difficult enough as it is, because not only is there all this bad blood which has built up really since the days of Brexit, but what a new Prime Minister is going to have to do is possibly not going to go down well with their own party. It's going to involve very difficult decisions. We've heard that from Jeremy Hunt, who is expected by most to stay as Chancellor, though not guaranteed under Rishi Sunak if he were to win. But he's already said there's going to be eye-wateringly difficult decisions. And to get those through Parliament, you're going to have to need a party that is very much together, very much pulling in the same direction.
Whoever it is, whenever it is, the new Prime Minister will walk through that famous door behind you in the not too distant future. And it just highlights, as Chris was saying, the third Prime Minister in 7 weeks, the tremendous political volatility here in this country at the moment, which has attracted headlines right around the world.
Yeah, and look, we do talk a lot, don't we, about, gosh, this is unusual, it's unprecedented. But, Ben, you and I have talked over many years about what's gone on in this place, and nothing like this has ever happened before. This turnover of prime ministers, not of leaders of the opposition, not just of ministers or cabinet ministers, but of prime ministers. It has been incredibly volatile, it's been disruptive. And of course, whilst there are lots of ministers still getting on with their jobs, the civil service still making sure that everything is running, no big decisions are being made. That happened all during the summer, and it's happening again. And that, I think, is a major problem for the Conservative Party, and that's certainly what is worrying lots of MPs who are beginning to fear that the electorate is giving up on them. So the challenge for the person who comes in, whoever that is to reassure the country once again, reassure the markets, get a grip of what is going on. But of course, the situation as far as the economy is concerned is even worse than it was because of what happened with the mini budget. So it's not just a matter of undoing that, it's about filling the hole, talking about spending cuts, for example, and all of that due to come just in a week's time. So they'll have to get straight into it to reassure people.
All right, Vicky, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. We're just looking at pictures from inside the Houses of Parliament, the committee room, where we're going to hear that announcement of the nominations sometime after 2 o'clock, which is when they close, from Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the influential 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, and that committee room's been quite a familiar sight in recent weeks. Let's go back to Chris Mason, our political editor, who's there in the Houses of Parliament. Chris, just talk us through exactly what happens next and the various permutations.
Well, Sir Graham Brady has become more of a television star than Anton Deck, hasn't he, in the last couple of months? We saw plenty of him over the summer during the various iterations and rounds of the Conservative leadership race. Then, as he would appear on a near daily basis, reading out the totals and telling us who was eliminated. Sir Graham was there just the other day setting out the rules for this contest shortly after the after Liz Truss had announced her resignation. And here he comes again, limbering up in a side room, no doubt, right now, ahead of his appearance in the next 10 or 15 minutes, to set out who has crossed that threshold of 100 backers. Now, we know because of the public declarations that Rishi Sunak is miles beyond that, so that element of it won't be news. Crucially, what we will discover is whether or not Penny Mordaunt is also on that piece of paper that Graham Brady will take out from his jacket pocket. That's going to determine whether or not we can say within 15 minutes who our next Prime Minister will be. By the way, we should point out they don't become Prime Minister instantly. Remember, this is a race to be leader of the Conservative Party. They become Conservative Party leader on winning that race, but they only become Prime Minister having been invited in to see the King and asked to form a government. Are we receiving news? I think we are. Of a development here. Let me just click on a Twitter link here. If it's going to open up, it isn't
we're hearing Penny
opening
Mordaunt
up.
has withdrawn, Chris.
So there you go. So Rishi Sunak is going to be our next Prime Minister, the third Prime Minister in a matter of 7 weeks. This extraordinary period of tumult in British politics. Its next chapter marked now with confirmation from Penny Mordaunt that she is withdrawing from this race or hasn't made the nominations. I haven't yet managed to read exactly what she is saying. But the crucial detail here at 2 o'clock is that Penny Mordaunt is out. The Conservative leadership race is over. Rishi Sunak is going to be our next Prime Minister.
Yeah, Chris, let's just read out what's on the screen there. Our party says Penny Mordaunt is our membership, whether we are elected representative, activists, fundraisers or supporters. We all have a stake in who our leader is. These are unprecedented times. Despite the compressed timetable for the leadership contest, it's clear that colleagues feel we need certainty today. They have taken this decision in good faith for the good of the country. Members should know that this proposition has been fairly and thoroughly tested by the agreed 1922 process. So Penny Mordaunt there dropping out and leaving it, Chris Mason, until the very last minute.
Yeah, what an incredible moment. Literally the last minute, as we were approaching 2 o'clock, at the point where the window was about to slam shut for any Conservative wannabe to assemble 100 nominations to stand for the leadership. Just as that window was about to slam shut, confirmation from Penny Mordaunt that she'd listened to those in her party, including those who had been supporting her, to withdraw from the contest in the interests of certainty and stability. And so with that moment happening, Rishi Sunak now set to be Prime Minister, short of someone managing to run a campaign that none of us have heard the faintest wind of in the last couple of days, and are managing to assemble all of those nominations. Rishi Sunak expected to be confirmed as Conservative leader by Sir Graham Brady here at Westminster in the next 10 or 15 minutes, as the only candidate to have both cleared the threshold and wanted to continue. Therefore, he will become Conservative leader, and then they'll be into a conversation about the choreography, a choreography with which we are becoming rather familiar this autumn, where Liz Truss will contact Buckingham Palace. My understanding is that the King returns to London this evening and can arrange an appointment with His Majesty in order to tender her resignation. I expect that will probably happen tomorrow, at which point, as is constitutional convention, the phone rings to the leader of the largest party at Westminster, the person who can command a majority in the House of Commons, and on that basis Rishi Sunak will be invited to the palace and invited to form a government, another new Conservative government facing so many of the same challenges as we talked about a few minutes ago that Liz Truss faced. September's loser becoming October's winner, Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, let's just reflect on that while we wait for Sir Graham Brady, and the door is opening there. Yeah, here we go. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. As returning officer in the leadership election, I can confirm that we have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party. And you may wish to know the new leader of the party will address us in this room at 2:30. Thank you.
Well, there we are. Confirmation, what we already knew, because Penny Mordaunt had dropped out of the race at the last moment, that Rishi Sunak is the next leader of the Conservative Party and set to become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So what was originally a three-horse race with Boris Johnson and Penny Mordaunt ended up as a one-horse race because Boris Johnson pulled out last night, and then Penny Mordaunt, just a few moments before that announcement of nominations at 2 o'clock, she pulled out as well because she was well short of the 100 minimum that she required. So let's go back to Chris Mason, our political editor. Well, we've seen some extraordinary moments in the last few weeks, Chris, in British politics, and I suppose none more extraordinary than this, in a sense that Rishi Sunak, of course, lost the contest to Liz Truss. He could barely have dreamt at that stage, that moment of defeat, that just a few weeks later he would be replacing her as Tory party leader and British Prime Minister.
It's quite astonishing, isn't it, that the guy who was defeated by the current Prime Minister is replacing her a matter of weeks after she took office, and that will take place in the next 24 hours. Rishi Sunak, the man who campaigned all summer as the underdog amongst Conservative Party members on that trudge around town halls and exhibition centres doing umpteen hustings as the underdog, defeated by Liz Truss, to then see Liz Truss's programme for government that he had critiqued, particularly her economic prospectus, collapse within the first few weeks of her trying to implement it. And here he is on the brink of replacing her and becoming Prime Minister. Confirmed that he is the new Conservative Party leader. We're into one of those windows where we have a different Conservative Party leader from Conservative Prime Minister. He assumes one title before he can assume the other. As we heard there from Sir Graham Brady, he is going to be going in front of his MPs, his parliamentary party, in the next half hour or so in order to, well, make the case for the government he is about to lead. We know he has the support of a majority of Conservative MPs who are willing to publicly endorse him before this moment. The big challenge now for the Conservative Party is the extent to which they can rally around a new Prime Minister. They weren't doing that in the final weeks and months of Boris Johnson's tenure. They weren't doing that, frankly, for anything but the first 45 minutes of Liz Truss's tenure. Their challenge now is to what extent can the party unite around Rishi Sunak, because the challenge he faces in government is towering. All of the things we talked about a few minutes ago, the situation with the public finances, they are grim, spiralling prices that we all know about, a party that has been very, very lacking in unity, to put it at its gentlest, and then the fact that Conservatives have been in government for a long time and are beginning to show that age in office, if you like. So all of those challenges, coupled with the fact that the opposition parties will say, look, Rishi Sunak never won an election, there'll also be those who say that Rishi Sunak hasn't said anything publicly shy of a tweet and an Instagram post saying he was running for the leadership since the point he declared again that he wanted to be Prime Minister. So he has a big job to do in terms of introducing himself to the country, particularly those who may not have paid that much attention to him over the summer when it looked highly likely that he wouldn't win anyway. So a massive challenge for him to come, but also, we should reflect, a moment of extraordinary triumph for him, just as it was for Liz Truss 7 weeks ago, because to reach the very top of politics, to lead the country, is a huge achievement that plenty in this postcode dream of, and very, very few have the privilege of being able to do. And he will be able to do that and start doing that as soon as tomorrow. Another moment of history worth marking, the first person of colour to be the British Prime Minister. Again, a moment that will make history. For him then, What starts now with his pitch to Conservative MPs in the next half hour, and then in the hours after that, is assembling a government. To what extent does he change things significantly or not, put his stamp on the party, whilst emphasising a desire for flexibility? I'm just, Ben, looking out of shot occasionally at the moment in the hope that we can grab a word with the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, in a second, but he is currently tied up talking to someone else. As soon as I've grabbed him, I'll let you know. We can have a chat with him.
Yeah, that would be good, Chris. Let's come back to you as soon as that is possible. In the meantime, let's go to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, who's in Downing Street. And so Rishi Sunak will be the occupant of that building behind you very shortly. We don't know exactly when. But there is, as Chris Mason was just telling us, I suppose, the question of democratic legitimacy that the opposition are raising at the moment, saying there needs to be a general election because this new Prime Minister is too removed from the Tory leader who won the last general election.
Yeah, absolutely. That is what the opposition want. There are a couple of Conservative MPs who are saying the same thing about a mandate to govern, to bring in these very difficult policies potentially. But of course, that's not how the system works. There was an election in 2019. That election meant that the Conservative Party was and still is in control of the House of Commons. And so that means that they get to choose the leader. Now, of course, there are plenty of voters who want to say, but if it goes to the right to the wire, then actually till the end of 2024.
Vicky, thank you for the moment. We're going to go back to Chris Mason inside the Houses of Parliament because, as he was telling us, I think he's got an interview with James Cleverly with some reaction.
Indeed so. Ben, let me introduce James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary. Afternoon to you. Your reaction, Rishi Sunak to be our next Prime Minister?
Well, look, I think what we have all wanted is for the government to be relentlessly focused on the domestic and the international issues that confront us all. Stability, focus on good government, these are absolutely the right things. And now that we know we have got some certainty, I think it's a very positive move. I think even another week's worth of delay would have been counterproductive. So I'm very, very pleased that we will now be able to focus on the things that matter, which is working for the British people.
Help me out here, because this time yesterday you were supporting Boris Johnson. You didn't want Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, did you?
Well, Boris decided not to stand. What I've always said is that the job of Prime Minister needs experience. Remember, I had suggested back in the summer that I felt that Boris Johnson should stay. He chose not to run. Rishi is the candidate. Was the candidate with the most experience. He's a smart, he's a talented guy, and I have no doubt that he will build a team that now focus on what we should always be focused on, which is the British people.
What do you say to our viewer who has looked in on what's happened in the last few weeks and comes to the reasonable-minded conclusion that it's been a complete shambles?
Well, no one would want to see what we've seen over the last few months. It's been difficult, it's been painful. I've been dealing with my international counterparts with all the challenges going on around the globe. And of course, what they want is they want the UK government, they want Britain to once again be the rock of stability.
Because they've been laughing at us, haven't they? I mean, overseas we've become a laughing stock.
Well, look, what's going on? I mean, no one's going to defend what's gone on over the last few months. It's been painful, it's been brutal, but now it comes to an end. We focus on the British people, we focus on delivering good government, we focus on supporting our friends in Ukraine and the other global issues that I have to deal with day in, day out. That's what we want to be doing.
And can you convince us right now, here and now, Tory psychodrama is over, you're actually going to focus on governing the country, all this fighting like rats in a sack is done and dusted?
Well, there is no point in refighting the arguments of the summer. The only thing now, in the minds of my Conservative parliamentary colleagues, should be supporting the Prime Minister, supporting the government, supporting the British people, supporting our friends internationally. That should be the only thing that we think about.
A couple of final thoughts. What about the argument that you hear from the opposition parties? Yes, I know opposition parties always call for a general election, but they will make the argument, look, people who voted Conservative back in 2019 did so with Boris Johnson on the ticket, if you like. Now, they've not only got his successor, they've got his successor's successor. And there's a legitimacy question there, isn't there? Who elected this guy who's about to become Prime Minister?
Well, the job of the Prime Minister in order to remain in office is to be able to enjoy the confidence of the parliamentary party. Rishi has shown through the numbers today that he has the overwhelming support of the parliamentary party. And of course, opposition parties want to call for a general election, and if they want to put in for a vote of no confidence, they absolutely have the right to do so. What the British people, I think, want, and what they certainly deserve, is a government delivery focused on them delivering for the British people, and that's what we're going to do.
One reflection for you, if I may, or from you, if I may, Mr. Cleverly, about this is a moment in history, a first person of colour becoming British Prime Minister, which is quite a moment.
Well, ethnic diversity in high office within the Conservative Party is nothing new. But the fact of the matter is, this is the first time for Prime Minister. I am pleased, but frankly unsurprised, that it's happened with Conservatives, because we have always been the party of meritocracy, hard work. Rishi's an incredibly hard-working and smart guy. So as I say, very, very pleased, but genuinely, that's not the thing that leaps into the forefront of my mind, because we've got work to do.
Final thought, are you staying on as Foreign Secretary? Has he told you you've still got a job?
So look, I think the composition of government is something for the new Prime Minister. He has not yet even been asked by His Majesty to form a government.
But come on, these conversations happen. You've been talking to me about stability, and you can't even tell me if you'll still be Foreign Secretary tomorrow.
Well, no one knows. No one knows how long they'll be in a job. The simple truth of the matter is, all of us, whatever role we are in, need to be relentlessly focused on delivering good government for the British people. And in whatever role I play, and of course, being Foreign Secretary is a fantastic job. I would love to continue in it. But in whatever capacity, our relentless focus is working on behalf of the British people.
Nice to talk to you. James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, today at least, as we find out how Rishi Sunak might shape his new government in the next 48 hours. You heard the pitch there that they will attempt to come together, this party. If they don't, Mr. Sunak's job will be impossible. If they do, it'll still be mighty difficult.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. And a lot of senior Conservatives wondering if they are going to keep their jobs in government or maybe get a new job. Let's go to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, who is in Downing Street outside Number 10. Just tell us a bit more about Rishi Sunak. We now know he's the next Tory party leader and going to be Britain's next Prime Minister. But for a lot of people, I suspect he's a bit of an unknown quantity. He was only elected a Member of Parliament a few years ago.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually an incredible climb to the top because, as you say, he was only elected in 2015. Now, if you think of some of the Prime Ministers who've been around a long time before they get to that role, where he's done it incredibly quickly, and at the age of 42, I think the youngest Prime Minister this century. So the question is, what experience does he have? I think most people, of course, would know him because he was previously the Chancellor. But here's a little look at who Rishi Sunak is.
Just a month after becoming Chancellor, Rishi Sunak was thrust into an economic crisis, overseeing the government's response to the COVID pandemic.
We're setting up a new coronavirus job retention scheme. Any employer in the country, small or large, charitable or non-profit, will be eligible for the scheme.
The furlough scheme was a huge intervention that cost billions. He also masterminded the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, encouraging diners back to restaurants when they reopened.
Hello.
All of that came just 5 years after he was elected as the Conservative MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire. His family had come to the UK from India. He's spoken about the sacrifices they made to send him to Winchester College, a top private school. After Oxford University, a career in banking and his marriage to the daughter of a billionaire made him extremely wealthy. Political opponents have commented on his expensive houses, clothes and shoes, suggesting he's out of touch with ordinary people. The revelation that his wife had non-dom tax status proved politically toxic. She later changed her tax arrangements.
She's always followed all the rules, paid all the tax in the UK that is due and paid tax internationally on her international investments. But she recognises this goes beyond just following those rules, so she's decided to pay both UK and foreign taxes.
Rishi Sunak is a long-standing Brexit supporter, but as Chancellor he rarely trumpeted the benefits of leaving the EU. He got caught up in the scandal about Downing Street parties, receiving a fine for breaking COVID laws. Friends say he just turned up early for a meeting in the Cabinet room. There'd been rumours of tensions between him and Boris Johnson over spending. After a number of scandals, Mr Sunak resigned in protest. He was blamed by Mr Johnson's friends for bringing him down.
Please welcome Rishi Sunak.
When he stood to be Tory leader in the summer, he warned that Liz Truss's tax-cutting agenda would lead to higher interest rates for the government and homeowners.
Your own economic advisor has said that your plans would mean that interest rates would have to go up to around 7%. So just think what that means for all of your mortgages.
He was rejected by Conservative members, but a few weeks on, his colleagues have decided he's the man to bring stability. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So Rishi Sunak is to be Britain's next Prime Minister. What has been the reaction right around the United Kingdom to that news? Well, let's bring you up to date. We can talk to our correspondents, James Shaw, who's in Glasgow, Chris Page in Belfast. Let's first go to our Wales correspondent, Hal Griffith in Cardiff. I don't know if you've had any time to gauge any reaction to the news, but what do you think a Sunak premiership is going to mean in Wales?
Yeah, well, we've already heard from the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies, who describes Rishi Sunak as a friend of Wales and, well, within a minute or two of that announcement, tweeted out a picture of him sitting with Mr Sunak. He describes him as someone who will want to invest but also challenge the Welsh Labour government that sits here in the Senedd on its record on health and education. And when he was in Wales earlier this year, it feels like a lifetime ago, it was only actually a couple of months ago that he was part of another leadership contest that Rishi Sunak said he would be testing the Welsh Government on its record and how much is spent on education, for example, and suggesting that the Welsh Health Service is in a far worse state than the Welsh NHS. What will be his relationship then with that Welsh Labour government? Will he be willing even to speak to the First Minister, Mark Drakeford? It's not something that Liz Truss has managed in, what is it now, shy of 50 days as Prime Minister. Ordinarily, a new Prime Minister would ring the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland, at least in their first day in office. We'll wait and see if that happens later this week. Labour, well, they're unlikely to shift from their calls for election. They will say that Mr Sunak will not have a mandate being the third, or to become the third Prime Minister within 3 months. So they, and Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Liberal Democrats, likely to repeat that call. But I think it will be interesting to see what approach Rishi Sunak takes to that relationship. Liz Truss was very combative. She described Mark Drakeford as a low-energy Jeremy Corbyn. Will he maybe be a little more cordial? As I said earlier, will he just be willing to pick up the phone?
Hal, thank you very much indeed. And let's go to James Shaw in Glasgow. And Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, was also complaining very vociferously that Liz Truss didn't talk to her. What do you think is being expected of a Sunak premiership in Scotland?
Well, we do know a little bit about what Nicola Sturgeon expects from Rishi Sunak as the new Prime Minister. She was talking about it before the news was confirmed that he is going to take on the job. And essentially, she really described him as just another Conservative politician that voters in Scotland have not voted for. And she also looked ahead to the statement that we expect from the Chancellor, presumably still on Monday, the financial and economic statement. And Nicola Sturgeon warned that there could be a wave of austerity hitting public services in Scotland, which she said it would not be able to withstand. She said that the only way to deal with what she described as the psychodrama going on in the Conservative Party was a general election. Now, in terms of what we know about Rishi Sunak's attitude to Scotland, well, helpfully there was a hustings in Perth during the election campaign involving him and Liz Truss back in August. And it was very clear, although he might be a bit more polite about it than Liz Truss was, he said it would just be, as he put it, frankly balmy to talk about an independence referendum in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So his attitude is going to be, it seems, exactly the same as the whole sequence of Conservative Prime Ministers that we've had over the last couple of years, setting their faces very firmly against a second independence referendum. He's going to take, I think, a slightly different approach to the Scottish Government. He wants more scrutiny of what the Scottish Government does, its policies on on drug deaths, on health and education. He wants people to be able to look at their performance more closely and compare it more with what is happening in the rest of the UK. So he's definitely going to take an interest in Scotland. I think that is clear.
James, thank you very much indeed. And let's go to our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page, who's in Belfast. And questions there about post-Brexit trade arrangements, about the Northern Ireland Protocol, big implications with this new premiership.
That's absolutely right, Ben. And as the new head of the government in London, one of the matters Rishi Sunak will be challenged about is how he can help to restore the devolved government here in Northern Ireland. We haven't had a fully functioning power-sharing executive since February. That is when the Democratic Unionist Party, in effect, collapsed the Stormont executive by walking out in protest against the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the DUP says it won't change that position unless the checks on goods arriving here from Great Britain are scrapped. So in the last few minutes, we've had a statement from the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, congratulating Rishi Sunak and saying that he must bear in mind that the protocol has, in his words, polluted every area of government in this part of the UK, and that the protocol as it currently stands is incompatible with the operation of devolved government. Now, there's a deadline coming up on Friday. That is the legal deadline for the devolved government power-sharing coalition to be formed following the election back in May, when Sinn Féin replaced the DUP as the largest party in the Stormont Assembly. The current Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has said that if there is no breakthrough, no restoration of power-sharing by Friday, and that certainly seems very unlikely to say the least, he will, he says, go ahead and call a fresh election to the Stormont Assembly to be held probably on the 15th of December. So obviously if there is a cabinet reshuffle in the coming days, well, the question is, will Chris Heaton-Harris still remain in post as Northern Ireland Secretary? Would any successor take the same tack as him? Though worth pointing out that this morning the junior minister at the Northern Ireland office, Steve Baker, said that no matter what the events were in Westminster, the government would still go ahead and call that election to the Northern Ireland Assembly on Friday.
OK, Chris Page, thank you very much indeed, and thanks too to James Shaw in Glasgow and Hal Griffith in Cardiff. Well, let's just bring you that moment again a few minutes ago when we heard from the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Conservative Backbenchers, Sir Graham Brady, with the announcement that Rishi Sunak is the new leader of the Conservative Party and Britain's next Prime Minister.
Good afternoon. As returning officer in the leadership election, I can confirm that we have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party.
So Graham Brady there of the 1922 Committee, and Rishi Sunak is going to be addressing them, we gather, at 2:30. Let's go back to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young in Downing Street. One valid nomination, as Sir Graham said, but I mean, yesterday, three were in that race. Boris Johnson dropped out last night, then Penny Mordaunt at the very last minute.
Yeah, I mean, it did all change pretty rapidly, didn't it? As you say, from three possible contenders down to just one. And I think it's a sign that within the Conservative Parliamentary Party, there was a desire to put an end to all of this, really. I mean, let's not forget Liz Truss, Prime Minister for just 7 weeks. And I think the turmoil that has caused within the party, lots of MPs extremely concerned about what that is doing to their popularity, as well as knowing that this government has to get on and make some very difficult decisions. So in the end, Penny Mordaunt's team suggesting she got around 90 people to support her. We might find that out later, but not enough. And even if she had, there was a lot of pressure going to be put on her to stand down, to end this contest as quickly as possible, and really just to try to move on. So for Rishi Sunak, a huge turnaround, having been so disappointed in the summer, losing out to Liz Truss when it went to the Conservative Party membership. He will now come into Downing Street as Prime Minister and will immediately have to get on with tackling some of those incredibly difficult issues.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. That's Vicky Young there, our Deputy Political Editor. We'll leave you with these Aerial pictures then live of Westminster on another dramatic day there. Just a few minutes ago we heard from Sir Graham Brady, who is chair of the 1922 Committee of Conservative Party backbenchers, that he had only received one nomination for the leadership of the Conservative Party after Penny Mordaunt, as you were just hearing, pulled out of the contest at the very last moment because she didn't have enough nominations. She needed 100 as a minimum. She wasn't anywhere near that. And Sir Graham Brady then declared Rishi Sunak as the only nomination and therefore the next leader of the Conservative Party. There were loud cheers and bangs on the table from Tory MPs, and he becomes the United Kingdom's next Prime Minister. That's it from the BBC News at 1. Thank you very much for watching.